I used to think my father's voice was the safest sound in the world. When I was little, his laughter filled every corner of our home, deep, rich, and warm, like a fireplace on a winter morning. He called me Sunshine. My mother, soft and patient, would smile whenever he said it. I thought love was unbreakable back then. I was wrong. The first crack appeared when I was 10. My father came home later and later, his tie loosened, his eyes distant. My mother's smile began to fade, replaced by silence. Arguments became the soundtrack of our nights, muffled shouting behind closed doors, then the sound of something shattering. I would sit on the stairs, clutching the old stuffed rabbit Mom gave me, waiting for the shouting to stop. Sometimes Dad stormed out and didn't return until morning. When he did, he acted like nothing had happened, placing a hand on my head and saying, "Go get ready for school, Sunshine." But the way he said it changed. It wasn't tender anymore. It was mechanical, as if he was speaking to someone else's child. When I turned 15, the truth became harder to ignore. Mom had grown fragile, her voice softer than ever, but her eyes carried a quiet fear. I'd catch her glancing at the door every time she heard his car. I asked once if she was scared of him. She only smiled and said, "Sometimes people get lost in the power they think they have." 2 years later, she was gone. A car accident, they said. My father didn't shed a tear. At the funeral, he stood straight as stone, eyes fixed on the coffin, jaw tight. I remember looking at him, trying to find some trace of grief. There was none. Just calculation, cold, measured calculation. After the funeral, he changed even more. He stopped calling me Sunshine. He stopped calling me at all. The will my mother left behind should have been simple. She'd written that everything she owned, her art studio, her savings, and her small lake house was to go to me. She'd built those things herself, separate from my father's empire of money and reputation. But somehow, when I turned 21, I received a letter from my father's attorney. "Mr. Robert Carter is challenging the terms of the late Mrs. Carter's will. The matter will be brought before court next month." I remember the world spinning when I read it. My own father was suing me for the last piece of my mother I had left. When I confronted him at his firm, he didn't even flinch. His office was glass and steel, like him, polished but cold. He looked up from his papers, unimpressed. "Elena," he said, his tone crisp, professional, "you don't have the means or maturity to manage those assets. I'm doing you a favor." "A favor?" I choked out. "You're stealing from your daughter." He smirked faintly. "I'm protecting the family name. Your mother didn't understand business, neither do you." Something broke inside me then, not my heart, that had been fracturing for years, but something deeper. The illusion, the last piece of me that still wanted to believe my father had any love left. When I left his office, the city air felt heavy. My reflection in the glass doors looked nothing like me, tired eyes, shaking hands, the ghost of a girl who once believed love could fix everything. I spent weeks trying to find a lawyer who'd take my case, but no one wanted to go against Robert Carter, one of the most influential attorneys in the state. "He's untouchable," they said. "He wins everything." But I found someone who didn't care about his power. A quiet, gray-haired woman named Margaret Lane, a retired judge who'd once known my mother. She looked at me across her kitchen table and said, "If you want to face him, you'll need more than evidence, dear. You'll need truth, and truth hurts." I didn't understand what she meant then. Not until I started going through my mother's old journals, the ones she'd hidden in the lake house attic. Between the pages, folded neatly, was a letter sealed in my mother's handwriting. The words on the envelope stopped my breath, for Elena, to be opened when he takes everything. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the letter heavy in my hands, the city lights flickering outside like quiet witnesses. My father had taken her love, her peace, and now he wanted what was left of her memory. But she had left me something too, not money, not property, a truth. And when the time came, I would use it, even if it meant destroying the man who gave me his name. The courtroom smelled like old paper and cold ambition. Every sound echoed, the creak of chairs, the whisper of silk ties, the impatient tapping of polished shoes. My father stood at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by 3 of his finest lawyers. I stood alone beside Margaret Lane, clutching the folder that contained my mother's letter. He didn't even look at me. Robert Carter, my father, my enemy, looked like a portrait of control. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his suit tailored within an inch of perfection. He smiled at the judge, a man he'd known for 20 years. That smile wasn't warmth, it was power wearing politeness like a mask. When the clerk called the session to order, my heartbeat matched the sound of the gavel. This isn't just a case, I reminded myself. This is war. Dad spoke first, his voice calm, confident, the same tone he used when giving interviews on television. Your Honor, he began, this isn't about greed, it's about responsibility. My daughter, while I love her dearly, lacks the financial maturity to handle significant property. I'm only asking to place these assets under my management until such a time that she demonstrates the proper judgment. Lies, all of it. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the version of himself that couldn't stand to lose. Not to anyone, not even to his dead wife. Margaret stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Carter's will was clear and legal. Her assets were independent of Mr. Carter's holdings. My client, as the sole beneficiary, has every right to them. This case isn't about maturity. It's about control. My father's lips twitched. For the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes, once the color of comfort, were now hard and gray. Elena, he said coolly, I taught you better than this. Family doesn't fight in public. I felt something rise in me, not fear, but fury. Family doesn't destroy each other in court. I whispered back. The judge rapped his gavel for silence, though I caught the faintest glint of discomfort in his eyes when he looked between us. My father's charm worked on most men, but something about our silent exchange unsettled him. As evidence was presented, documents, photos, witness statements, I realized how thoroughly my father had prepared. He painted me as reckless, ungrateful, irresponsible. His lawyers produced emails I'd written in moments of despair, twisting my words into proof of instability. Each blow landed like a slap. Margaret leaned close. Don't react, she murmured. He wants you emotional. Stay silent. Let him dig his own grave. So I sat, staring at the man who'd once held my hand through nightmares, now using the law like a blade against his own daughter. Then came the moment. Margaret rose and handed the judge the sealed envelope. Your Honor, this letter was written by the late Mrs. Carter and addressed to my client. Its contents are directly relevant to this case. My father's composure cracked just a flicker. Objection, he barked. We don't know the authenticity or relevance of this so-called letter. It's signed and dated. Margaret countered smoothly. And witnessed by a notary, the judge took the letter, adjusting his glasses. His face softened as he looked at my mother's handwriting. For a moment, even he seemed to remember that this wasn't just a case. It was a family tearing itself apart. He nodded for me to approach the witness stand. My hands trembled as I swore the oath, then unfolded the letter in front of me. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, my mother's favorite scent, my dearest Elena. It began, if you're reading this, it means the storm I feared has come. I tried to protect you from his hunger for control, but there are things you must know, things that died with me unless you speak them. I looked up. My father's face had drained of color. The courtroom fell silent. He will try to take everything, but remember, the truth is heavier than wealth. When the moment comes, tell him what he told me the night before I died. The letter ended there abruptly, painfully. There was no signature, no explanation, just those chilling words. The judge leaned forward. Miss Carter, what did your mother mean? I swallowed hard. I don't know yet, Your Honor, but I intend to find out. The session adjourned for the day, and the air outside felt different, thick with tension. I caught my father's voice behind me as we left the courthouse. You're playing a dangerous game, Elena, he said quietly. Don't dig into things you don't understand. I turned, meeting his cold eyes. Maybe that's what you said to her, too. He didn't respond. He just stared for a long moment, then walked away. That night, I sat in my apartment, rereading the letter over and over. The phrase, what he told me the night before I died, burned into my mind. I didn't know yet what those words were, but my father did. And judging by the way his hands had trembled when I read them aloud, he was terrified I'd find out. The next morning, the courthouse felt different, heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves knew something dark was about to surface. Reporters had gathered outside, drawn by the spectacle of Robert Carter, the undefeated lawyer, fighting his only daughter over a dead woman's will. Margaret and I walked through the crowd in silence. She carried the letter. I carried my mother's memory like a shield. Inside, my father was already waiting. He looked pale, though he hid it behind his perfect posture. I noticed how he avoided my gaze now, how his confidence had thinned into something brittle. The judge entered, and the murmurs ceased. His expression was unreadable, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, too. Margaret began softly, Your Honor, after reviewing the letter and the late Mrs. Carter's journals, we believe there is evidence of coercion and misconduct in this family's financial affairs prior to her passing. Robert slammed his palm on the table. This is absurd. Sit down, Mr. Carter, the judge ordered sharply. Margaret continued, we also discovered a bank transaction dated 2 days before Mrs. Carter's death. A large sum transferred from her account to a private firm registered under an alias. The alias matches a name once used by Mr. Carter in offshore dealings. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked like angry insects. My father clenched his jaw. That's enough, he snapped. You're dragging personal matters into. I stood up before he could finish. Personal matters? My voice trembled but didn't break. You mean Mom's death or the lies you buried with her? The judge rapped the gavel, but no one listened. My father turned to me, fury rising in his eyes. You don't understand what you're playing with, Elena. No, I said, stepping closer. I finally do. I took out a small USB drive and placed it on the evidence table. This contains a voicemail, my mother's final message. It was recorded the night before she died. She must have hidden it in her studio, and I found it last week. The room went silent. When the audio began to play, her voice filled the courtroom, shaky, scared, but unmistakably hers. Robert, please stop this. I won't be quiet anymore. If you go through with it, they'll find out about the bribe, about the judge. I can't live like this. Then a pause. A sound, a man's voice, cold, calm, final. Then don't live at all. The recording cut off. The courtroom erupted. Shouts, gasps, the clatter of papers. The judge's face turned ashen. My father sat frozen, every drop of color drained from his skin. The bailiff moved toward him, but I stepped forward first. The world seemed to blur around me, the noise, the lights, the chaos. I could hear only my heartbeat as I walked to my father's table. He looked up at me, his mask of power finally gone. I leaned close, so only he could hear. And I whispered the same 2 words my mother had written in that letter, the same words she'd said to him the night before she died. Judge Simmons. The name struck like thunder. My father's eyes widened in horror. Across the bench, Judge Simmons, the same man presiding over our case, went completely pale. His hand froze midair, trembling. The entire courtroom fell deathly still. Why? You don't know what you're saying, the judge stammered. But I did. My mother had known that Robert and Judge Simmons had been partners not in law, but in crime. Bribes, hidden accounts, falsified case records, a trail of corruption buried for years. And the night before she died, she'd threatened to expose them both. Now their secret was in the open. Reporters surged forward. Bailiffs shouted. My father stood abruptly, rage and panic twisting across his face. "This is a lie," he roared. "She's manipulating. Sit down, Mr. Carter." The judge snapped, his voice cracking. But the authority was gone from it. Everyone could see it. Everyone knew. Margaret's voice rose above the chaos. "Your Honor, given this new evidence, I move that the court immediately suspend proceedings and refer this case, and all related criminal allegations to the state attorney's office." The judge hesitated. His eyes darted between me and my father. Then he lowered his gaze, defeated. "Granted," he whispered. The gavel came down like a final heartbeat. My father sank into his chair, hollow, silent. The man who once demanded everything now had nothing left, not power, not pride, not control. I turned and walked out, my mother's voice echoing softly in my head. The truth is heavier than wealth. Outside, the world exploded with cameras and noise. But all I felt was peace, a strange, quiet peace that tasted like justice. The courtroom was chaos behind me, flashing lights, frantic voices, the dull hum of scandal beginning to spread. But outside, the air was still. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Margaret walked beside me, silent but steady. "You did well," she murmured. "Your mother would be proud." I nodded, though pride wasn't what I felt. My hands were shaking. My heart wasn't celebrating. It was mourning not just her, but the years I'd spent trying to be loved by a man who only understood power. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. Prominent attorney Robert Carter under investigation for judicial corruption. Judge Simmons steps down amid scandal. Every network, every paper, every corner of the internet carried their names and mine. By evening, my father's empire began to crumble. Law partners cut ties, clients withdrew. The firm he'd built on fear and falsehoods started to rot from the inside out. He tried calling me once that night. I let it ring. The next morning, I returned to the lake house, the one my mother built with her own hands. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that felt like forgiveness. The lake shimmered under the pale sun, rippling gently, as if welcoming me home. I went inside, dust dancing in the light through cracked windows. Every corner of that house smelled faintly of her. Lavender, paint, and something sweetly human, love that hadn't vanished, only lingered. On her old writing desk sat a photograph I'd missed before. Me at 7, covered in paint, smiling up at her while she laughed. A tear slipped down my cheek, not from pain this time, but release. "I did it, Mom," I whispered. I finally stopped him. Outside, leaves rustled like a soft applause. For days, the investigation deepened. Margaret kept me updated. The evidence on the USB bank records, voice recordings, even old case files, tied my father and Judge Simmons to years of corruption and coercion. It was over, completely over, when the official notice arrived that all of my mother's property had been restored to me. I expected to feel triumphant. But what I felt was a stillness. Revenge hadn't healed me, truth had. That night, I drove to the cemetery, to the place where it all began. The air smelled of rain. I knelt beside my mother's grave, brushing away fallen leaves. Her name was carved in marble, simple and kind, like she'd been. I thought winning would make me happy. I said quietly, "But all I really wanted was for you to rest." For a long while, I sat in silence. Then I placed the letter, the one she'd written for me, on her grave. It had done its work. As I stood to leave, headlights appeared behind me. A car door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know it was him. "Why did you come?" I asked, my voice steady. My father stepped closer, slower than I'd ever seen him move. The powerful man in the courtroom was gone, replaced by a ghost in a wrinkled suit, eyes hollow, shoulders bent. "Elena," he said softly, "you've destroyed everything." "No, Dad," I said, facing him. "You did." He flinched like the words had weight. You could have kept quiet. We could have handled this privately. Privately, I almost laughed, like you handled Mom's death, like the judge handled his guilt. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw something in him I'd never seen before. Not arrogance, not anger. Regret. He looked down at her grave, his voice trembling. She was supposed to keep it quiet. I never meant for her to die. I finished for him. He shut his eyes. A tear, one single tear, slipped down his face. Leave, Dad. I said softly, you don't belong here anymore. He hesitated, then turned and walked away. His footsteps faded into the rain. I stayed until the sky broke open, rain spilling across the earth like a baptism. My clothes soaked through, my hair clung to my face, but I didn't move. For the first time, I felt clean. When I finally drove home, the world seemed quieter, lighter somehow. The storm was gone. Weeks later, when the final verdict came, Robert Carter disbarred, Judge Simmons sentenced, I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to. Justice didn't need an audience. Instead, I returned to the lake house and began to paint again. I painted my mother's smile, the reflection of the lake at dusk, the color of peace, and in every stroke, I let go of a piece of my anger. The world would remember Robert Carter as a fallen titan, but I would remember him as something else, a warning. Because sometimes, power doesn't die with a bang. It fades quietly, the way guilt does when there's no one left to believe your lies. And sometimes revenge isn't loud, it's a whisper, 2 words spoken softly enough to make the guilty remember forever. Epilogue. Months later, I visited the courthouse again, not for a case, but to sign the final papers transferring everything officially into my name. The clerk handed me the documents and smiled. You handled yourself with grace, Miss Carter. I smiled back. I learned from the best. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of lavender. I looked up at the sky, blue and endless, and whispered, "It's over, Mom." Then I walked away, not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as the woman my mother raised me to be, brave, quiet, and free.